that can be more of that positive anxiety. And I think there is, some level of anxiety that goes into every big competition because of the expectations that are tied around the performance for that competition. And this is where, again, I think depending on someone's individual psychological functioning, how they manifest that anxiety, how they think about it, how they prepared for experiencing those feelings of anxiety with a mental performance consultant or a sports psychologist is very unique for each person. And I'll say I've definitely worked with athletes who have had some anxiety off of the charts, and it's been facilitative for their performance. And then other people who that anxiety has prevented them from ever reaching their potential. So I think blanket statements around anxiety are challenging, and that's where the individual performance help can be really valuable.
Dr. Taylor?
Yeah, so first of all, I don't use the word anxiety unless it's in a clinical setting. Because anxiety for me, there's no such thing for me as good anxiety. It is by definition a negative experience. So I use the term intensity. And so there's this range of intensity from really low intensity, super relaxed, to really high intensity, like sheer terror. And somewhere along that continuum, every athlete has their one ideal level of intensity. So some are super chill, some are kind of medium fired up, and others are like banging their head against the wall, super fired up. And so a lot of my work is about helping them, two things, helping them identify that ideal intensity. And if they do experience anxiety, and I don't mean in the clinical sense, because the fact is, yes, as you suggest, every athlete is going to experience what in psychology jargon is called anticipatory arousal. So anytime an athlete is preparing themselves for a challenge, and this goes back to the Serengeti 250,000 years ago when we were on the Serengeti, basically that anticipatory arousal, that intensity they experience, sometimes anxiety, is the fight or flight reaction. It's our survival instinct. But instead of physical life or death, it's more psychological or sport life or death. So my goal is to give them tools to understand and then what their ideal intensity is, and then to help them have means to reach that ideal level of intensity before and during every competition.
All right, Dr. Michelle.
Sure, yeah. So I think what Lenny and Jim described there is great. Just one thing to add, and I think maybe I'll give you, Chris, you asked a couple of questions ago, what does that look like or what does that feel like, right? And Jim sort of talked about psychological jargon. I mean, for me, anxiety specifically refers to thoughts, and I'm anxious about what's coming up in the future. So that's the first place I would go. And also I would to Jim's point say, look, it's normal. It's a human experience to anticipate this thing that you've been, working for years and years and years. If it's an Olympic experience, 4 years for maybe 2 minutes of work, right? If it's, depending on the sport, whatever it is. So it's first of all, normalizing it. Second, accepting and understanding what's driving it, that it doesn't necessarily need to be a bad thing. Jim talked about intensity. You can talk about energy levels. You can talk about, there's different ways of labeling that. And that sweet spot, each athlete knows where they need to be. So for me, like, how do you then take that information and get back into the moment? We talk a lot about mental performance consultants, about athletes are at their best when they're locked in the moment at the right place at the right time. If you're experiencing a level of anxiety or uncertainty or anticipatory stress about what's going to happen in the future, you're certainly not in the moment. And if you think back to probably your best performances that you've had, I don't care if you're an athlete or a teacher or a fireman or whatever, you're probably locked into what you need to be doing at the right place at the right time. And so it's about giving them a little bit of sense of, why is this happening? Accepting that it's normal and human, and then some strategies to bring them back to the moment. It could be mental strategies. Hey, here are the things I want you to remember or say to yourself to bring you back. It could be physical strategies. Here's some breathing exercises or some self-regulation strategy to bring that energy or intensity level down. It could be a focus strategy. Here's where you need to bring your attention in order to bring your mindset to the right place and your body feeling the right way. It could be an emotional strategy, but that's where the human element comes into this. Everyone's different. And I think Lenny and Jim will tell you, we don't take the same approach with every athlete. Like, part of our job is to understand who they are, where they're coming from, their experiences, their belief systems, their stress response. how did it get to where it is? Because if you're anxious at the top of a run, Jim, for something, maybe there's a big race that somebody had and they fell, right? And now every time they've been working and they've been working and practice is great. And now they get up to the top of the run and they feel anxiety because the last time they were up there, they failed. So you have to be able to explore that and have those conversations. But that's not the same for everybody. So there's a science to the work that we do. There's also an art to it. What kinds of questions do you ask? What resources do you give the athlete? Shoot, whether it's videos or podcasts or books or articles or music, there are so many tools at our disposal as mental performance coaches to meet the athlete where they're at and give them the tools in creative ways that are going to meet them where they're at so they can get an understanding of what's going on and ultimately get back to the moment.
So, go ahead. So somebody want to roll with that? I think I know where it was going.
Increasing what we might refer to as economy, right? Trying to make the athlete as valuable as possible.
Yeah, I can respond to that. So a lot depends upon the individual in terms of their energy level. Also, it depends upon the sport. So if you're a golfer, you have to manage your energy over the course of 3 or 4 or 5 hours. So you can't be super intense the whole time. So you have to turn it on, turn it off. And a long game, a marathon, whatever the different sport is, versus like a 100-meter dash. You just need to have it there, nail it at that moment for 10 seconds or sub 10 seconds. So a lot of it is a combination of understanding the athlete and what their energy levels are and what their ideal intensity is, as well as what the demands of the sport are. Because if they're inconsistent, then it can't possibly work.
Lenny, meeting the athlete where they are.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of the sweet spot of where we have our value add, right? If apps could do this work and people could kind of work with books, then we wouldn't really be needed. But the added benefit of having that personal interaction is us actually getting that history and really finding that athlete and meeting them where they're at. And that's where I think building that rapport and creating a relationship is such a core component in the work that we do. And then Dr. Michelle touched on this earlier, but like that looks very different in, are you private practice with athletes coming for you? Are you embedded within the team working for the front office? Is your primary responsibility kind of like team performance? Is it helping individual performance? And how do you meet individual athletes' goals in these different settings where we're kind of working either just with that athlete specifically or with the whole team and the coach included?
Okay, and while we have your undivided attention, let's go ahead and discuss how meeting them where they are, or what it looks like when you are in an office setting and when you are on the field and when you are at the competition or those kind of things, because all three of those places are your office as a performance psychologist. So you have to be ready to go, whether it's in a pair of sweatpants or your business casuals.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And that's go ahead, Lenny.
Oh, yeah. I was just going to say, I think, there are different things that you can do in each of those settings. I think one of the awesome things about having people come into the office is actually removing them from that athletic arena and getting to see more dimensions of them as a person, getting to understand what they're like off of the field, which actually really helps me when I go onto the field and help them. So even when I work with teams, like on the field settings, I still encourage athletes like, hey, my office isn't that far. Come and sit in my office and let's have this conversation off the field and see, just if we're talking about it in a different environment from a different perspective under less intensity, if we can work through some of these things, then how do we carry that when, the next day or the next week I see you on the field and you remember that conversation we had in the office, and I can hold you accountable in that higher pressure, higher intensity second environment of training. And then one step further, how do we then move that to that competition arena, which is always the most important arena for elite athletes, because that's where they make their money. As much as I wish it wasn't, it's where it counts.
Well, that's a true statement, and that plays into it as well. Some of those guys, as professionals, especially on the running scene or the track and field scene, it's not the same money as it is in the NFL or Major League Baseball. So, if they're dependent on a sponsorship for part of their support or things like that, then performance becomes critical, and that can sometimes, create a bunch of negative excitement. I'm trying not to say anxiety there, Dr. Jim. Go ahead.
No, you can call it anxiety if it's bad for me. But I think one of the wonderful things about the work we do, unlike a traditional therapist, is we don't have to be in the four walls of the office to be effective. There's a place for that because it's safe. It's comfortable. They know it's like Las Vegas rules. Whatever stays in that office is whatever's said in that office is going to stay in that office.
Right.
I do some of my best work with the athletes in the sports that I have some skill at. Like I was an elite alpine ski racer, so I do a lot of work with alpine ski racers. I'm a serious triathlete, so I can cycle and I can run. And so I go out skiing or running or biking. And trust me, I'm pretty good at all of them, but I'm not world class, that's for sure, compared to some of my clients. But it's an environment that they're really comfortable in. And so in that comfortable environment, that's their place. They can be very open in ways that might not be possible in a sort of confined office setting. And so there's benefits. Plus, when I'm out in the sport with them, I can actually work with them, have them try different mental strategies, using mental tools and get immediate feedback. Like, oh my gosh, when I focused on this thing, I performed better. Or when my intensity was too low, I didn't feel as good and I didn't perform as well. So they can get direct feedback with us being right there to give them interventions, get feedback, and create this really wonderful feedback loop of progress.
So, Dr. Michelle, we're talking about where we work with athletes in the field, in the office, on the bus, plane, or train ride, kind of when you're doing the mental part of performance. You kind of do it everywhere and anywhere. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, if you're integrated into a complex system